Hello, and welcome to the Governance Solutions Podcast. I'm Jake Skinner, Vice President of Online Solutions here at GSI, and co-hosting with me this afternoon is our founder and CEO, Dr. Deborah Brown. Hey, Deborah.
Hey, Jake, thanks so much. Well, okay. Welcome, everybody. We have a special guest today, David Suzuki. I'm sure he is familiar to most of you. He has made it his life's work to help humanity understand, appreciate, respect, and promote nature through radio, television, and over 55 books. And 20 of those, by the way, are for children. And I know those are not easy to write. They're actually harder. I've tried writing one. He's communicated humanity's collective impact on the natural world, an impact that now threatens, I would say, the future of human life. He is a grandfather, he's a scientist, he's the former host of CBC's The Nature of Things, and oh my goodness, the list goes on. He was the recipient of the Canadian Academy of Cinema and Television's 2020 Lifetime Achievement Award. He's been recognized by BC Achievement in partnership with the Lieutenant Governor of BC for his extraordinary work as a recipient of the 2021 BC Reconciliation Award. He's a companion to the Order of Canada, a recipient of UNESCO's Kalinga Prize for Science, the Right Living Award, the United Nations Environment Program's Global 500 Award. He's an emeritus professor at the University of BC. He's been honored with 33, count them, that's a real number, 33 honorary degrees from universities in Canada, the US, and Australia. He's been honored with adoptions and names from 8 Indigenous nations in Canada and Australia. And David, I got to tell you, he is one impressive individual. He's passionate, he's committed, he has engaged in this issue for his entire life, and we just are honored to have this opportunity to speak with him today. Thank you, David, and welcome.
Thank you very much. This is not an audience, normally I'm preaching to the choir, people who already agree with me, and this is not my normal audience, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to share a few ideas with you. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I am sure that there will be a lot of welcome friends in the room, David. And I'm okay. I'm going to be the eternal optimist here. And so, David, you retired from UBC in, I think it was 2001, and the nature of things in 2023, I guess. Yet you say this is the most important part of your life. Why is that?
Well, like all elders, I've lived an entire lifetime, and I no longer have to kiss anybody's ass to get a job, a raise, or a promotion. I'm past the stage where lust or a drive for power or celebrity or money is a factor in my life. So I'm now free of all of those other pressures, and I can speak the truth from my heart. And I urge people from the corporate sector, from forestry and fisheries and fossil fuels and drugs, pharmaceuticals, come out when you retire. You don't have a stake in the status quo. Act the way retired admirals and generals against nuclear war. When I was part of the peace movement in the 80s, these were retired admirals and generals who, when they were active in the military, had to say, we need more nuclear weapons, defense and all that. But when they retired, they could say, this is crazy. Nuclear weapons are not safe. They make the world a more dangerous place. And they had a profound influence. And I urge elders from all other areas to come forth. But let me start right at the beginning by saying, most of the people who are listening now, you won't hear anything I say. And that's not because you're stupid or anything else, but we learn to see the world and hear what's going on through gender, our ethnicity, our religion, our nationality, our language, our socioeconomic status, the profession that we're in. They all shape the way we respond to the world out there. And so, when my words are going to come out, and they're going to blow your mind, and your response is immediately going to be defensive or offensive. You're full of baloney. This is a really difficult challenge that we face today, and the thing that leads me to despair. If you look at the recent election in the United States, you have a man who, in my view, should never have been qualified to run, but who made no attempt to reach out and actually have a dialogue. We're not talking to each other because we've got all these gates and defenses, and it's very, very difficult. Sorry to go on like that, but I'm just telling the
Well,
audience,
I can see that
thank you
you're
for
clear.
coming.
Yes, I can see that you're clearly frustrated. And I got a bit of a picture of that because just telling people that you were going to be in this podcast, I had a lot of haters come at me, at my company, at you. And so I understand how that could make someone feel and how frustrated that would make you. Um, I get that, but I think you have a really important message. And I think we are seeing changes in terms of how people are looking at the environment for the good and the bad. And so I'm wondering, what's your sense of how public opinion about the environment has changed over your lifetime and career? Like, is there anything hopeful?
Well, I started I did my first television series in 1962. Okay, it was black and white. It was a local channel in Edmonton, where I was at the University of Alberta, and I did 8 parts on genetics. And back in those days, I was shocked at how little people understood science. That's why I went into television, to say, how can you make major decisions or hold your political leaders accountable to various issues if you don't understand the science underlying those issues? And so it was, but back in the 1960s and 70s, when I was just going on this, scientists and medical doctors were very highly regarded in society. And what has really been shocking today is the extent to which expertise, people who know something, has been totally downgraded. People are now getting most of their information on the internet. Social media then means that Bannon and QAnon becomes as reputable a source of information as the leading scientists of the world. When you look, the man who may very well become the health minister in Trump's regime, namely Kennedy, has written a book attacking Tony Fauci, the leading man in epidemiology and in the NIH. He's attacked this man as not a credible person. So this is the thing that really disturbs me. That you have all of the expertise coming from climatology, for example, and yet that doesn't stack up against some economist or somebody that comes out and says, this is all nonsense, it's a waste of time. We don't recognize that information, there's a credibility issue here. And that's the huge change that's gone on. In terms of the environment being an important issue, it's cycled. In 1980, the late 1980s, the environment was at the top of the agenda. And then, of course, we had the Earth Summit in Rio in 1992. And let me just state here that in 1992, in anticipation of the largest gathering of heads of state ever in human history, this is a big deal, was going to signal that from that point on, the environment had to be a part of all of the decisions we make at the political, at the corporate, at all levels. We had to take the environment seriously. Now, let me just quote, a remarkable document came out in anticipation of the Earth Summit. It was signed by more than half of all of the Nobel Prize winners alive at that time. It was called World Scientists Warning to Humanity. And the opening lines were, human beings and the natural world are on a collision course. Human activities inflict harsh and often irreversible damage on the environment and on critical resources. If not checked, many of our current practices put at serious risk the future we wish for human society and may so alter the living world that it will be unable to sustain life in the manner that we know. That came out in 1992 from the leading scientists of the world. What have we done to pay attention to that? We haven't taken it seriously.
I as a youth in the 90s myself, I do remember there was that sort of shining moment. We did make maybe a brief forward step. Do recall the CFC situation and closing the hole in the ozone layer. That seemed to be a positive step forward. But I have to agree with you looking at the Tony Fauci situation that that kind of collective, coalescing around a cause and getting something done seems much more difficult these days. Is there something in to you as an expert in the field, is there a challenge that you see on the horizon that if we could just get it together, if we could just really gather ourselves and put in a concerted effort that we could, I know it's a huge galaxy of problems. Is there something you can see that would really be an easy knockout?
This is the big question. Are we, I've said for years now, the environmental movement, that includes me with it, has fundamentally failed. We've failed because we got involved. Usually we arise over an issue. They're going to build a dam here. They're going to clear cut this forest over here. That factory is polluting this river. And so, an organization springs up and we fight the issue. And, in 1988, I became involved. We did a show on the Amazon rainforest, and I learned that there was going to be a big dam on the Xingu River, and indigenous people asked if I would help. We raised a lot of money, went down and protested, and got the World Bank to withdraw its loan of $500 million to build that dam. So we won, right? Except 30 years later, the Brazilian government said, we don't need that money from the World Bank. Our economy is strong enough. The dam is now almost ready to go in action. 1970s, we fought against a dam in British Columbia that was going to be built at Site C on the Peace River. Guess what? It's just gone into action now. We stopped it in the 1970s. But you see, the fundamental mentality hasn't changed. So we thought, hey, great, we stopped these dams. Isn't that great? We stopped the proposals to drill for oil in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. We stopped it over and over again. But guess what? Drill, 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 baby, drill.
Drill, baby, drill.
Mantra.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is still a threat. Why? Because we haven't fundamentally changed our relationship with the world around. When Mr. Harper, our prime minister for 10 years, said, we can't do anything about climate change, that's crazy economics. He elevated the economy above the atmosphere that gives us air to breathe, that gives us weather, climate, and the seasons. This is madness to say, well, we can't do anything about that. The economy is threatened. And look at the result. I mean, look at the newspapers today about what's going on in Delhi, in India. You look at the pollution there. We haven't dealt with the real issues. What is a fundamental issue? The environment. What is the environment out there? Well, guess what? Most humans on the planet now live in big cities. And we think, oh, well, as long as there's a park over there and, we've protected this forest here, everything's fine because nature isn't relevant for us. Well, I tell children this, and you're the audience. Thank you for coming. This is every bit important for you too. I tell children, I say, now take a deep breath. Okay, hold it. Now, don't take another breath for 5 minutes. I'm going to continue to talk. And of course, children are so trusting, you see them holding their breath. And after 20 seconds, they turn bright red and then they breathe out. And I say, now, we don't even think about it. But air, we need air every minute of our life. You can't commit suicide by deliberately holding your breath. Your body will not allow you to do that. What happens when you take a breath of air? You suck 1.5 liters of air into your bodies, goes into your lungs, blood cells and pick up the oxygen and whatever else is in the air that's in your lungs, and every beat of your heart circulates that oxygen, that air through your body. And when you breathe out, you don't breathe all of the air out because then your lungs would collapse. About half of the air stays in your body. So what does that mean? We are air. There's no line between us and the air. It's in us, it's circulating through our bodies. And what comes out of my nose, well, we can't do it here, but will immediately go up the noses of everybody else around. We are embedded in a matrix of air. Whatever we do to the air, we do directly to ourselves. If you want to dump your car exhausts into it, if your chimneys from your factories are, guess what? It's coming straight into us. We are air. It's in us. It's circulating around the planet. It connects us. Well, when you think of it that way, we are not a very intelligent animal because of what we do to the air. And it's the same thing with water. You and I are 60 to 70% water. We're a big blob of water with enough thickener added, we don't dribble away on the floor, but we leak water out of our mouth and our crotch and everywhere else. If you don't have water for 4 to 6 days, you're dead. If you have to drink polluted water, you're sick. And yet we use water as a garbage can. Wait a minute now. We know from childhood in the hydrologic cycle, water is cartwheeling around the planet. Whatever we do to the water in India or Africa or Canada, guess what? It's circulating around the planet through the hydrologic cycle, and it's going into us as well. We are the food that we eat. Most of it grows in the soil. What do? We actually put seeds into toxic chemicals, neonicotinoids. So the seed incorporates the pesticide into the seed. When it sprouts, the roots, the stem, and the leaves all have neonicotinoids in it. So great. You say, that's great. Kill all the pests are out. But wait, how do neonics kill? We know that bees are very sensitive to neonics. So we've been fighting neonics. They're neurotoxins. They affect nerves. Wait a minute now. We're putting this neonics into the seed. So whatever part of the plant we eat, we're eating neurotoxins. I researched all my life as a scientist, fruit flies. I got a big grant from the government to study fruit flies because we discovered a nerve mutant in flies. And you might say, who cares about nerve mutants in flies? Well, guess what? The nerves in flies are the same as the nerves in us. Wait a minute now. We're putting neurotoxins to kill insects into our food. And then we wonder, wait a minute, what about these rates of autism that must be caused by vaccination? Wait a minute now. We're eating toxins in our food that are neuropesticides. So if we don't connect ourselves to that world, that's the heart of the crisis we face. There is no sense of responsibility of what we do to nature. We hammer nature as if somehow that's not relevant, but we're still animals. We still have to breathe clean air, drink clean water, eat clean food. If we don't have that, we don't survive or we're very sick.
Well,
So I think
I
this is
listened
the
to you,
big
David.
challenge.
I listened to you and you make absolute perfect sense. And it kind of goes back, makes me think about your comments about credibility is just sort of ignored. And, many of us make our decisions based on emotion or how something makes us feel rather than the facts. And so the facts for some just don't seem to matter. In, we think about the social media environment of today that you've talked about. People can always look for and find the facts that are framed in a way that may distort reality or may even be intentional, like attempts at misinformation, but they want that. They gather it as facts. They have this confirmation bias and confirm what they feel, and so that they can believe that if it makes them feel in the way they want to feel, and even if it makes no logical sense. And so,
Look,
it's a big question, but what's the pathway to sustainability? How do you fix this?
Well, what is sustainability anymore? I mean, the reality is if you don't pay attention to the fundamental realities, the facts, and if you look at the response of the fossil fuel industry, for example, to me, to Al Gore, if you look at Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta, who's attacked me and my organization, if you look at Jason Kenney before Danielle Smith, it was all the same. They don't want to talk about climate change as a reality, as a problem. It's all Suzuki and his gang. They're anti-Alberta. They're against the economy. So he's a jerk. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He lies. All these things keep us from discussing the fundamental issue. What is the fundamental issue? Climatologists have been telling us for over 100 years that burning fossil fuels is adding greenhouse gases, and greenhouse gases trap heat. And if we continue on the trajectory, we're going to have real problems. The fossil fuel industry has known about this since 1959, when Edward Teller, one of the leading physicists in the world, appeared before the API, the American Petroleum Institute, and told them what the consequences of burning fossil fuels are. But, we have all kinds of effective ways of, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's trying to get a bigger grant. All these excuses that prevent us from listening, which is the reason why many of the people sitting here will not hear what I'm saying, because they're too busy going, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a jerk.
So
All
what
kinds
you're
of
saying,
reasons not to
what
pay
you're
it.
Yeah, what you're saying absolutely rings true to me. So often, the first argument you hear in the boardroom is like the financial case. Make the financial case for it. So I know, though, however, I was poking around davidsuzuki.org the other day. I noticed you had written a piece called "The Undeniable Economic Case for Climate Action," which seems very definitive. So could you just provide a bit of an overview of that argument, and what is the economic case for
Well,
climate action?
I was in a conversation with Mark Carney in the public, and Mark has really got it as an economist. He understands the environment, but he still thinks of the system that we're a part of now. Just as long as you let the market and educate people and get the market and corporations to do the right thing, we can get to a sustainable life. I'm really sorry. The economy itself is the driving force of destruction. It's as simple as that. But there are two fundamental flaws in the economic system we have. The first one, and Partha Dasgupta, an economist in the UK, wrote a great big tome a couple of years ago showing that the economy regards the environment as an externality. It's not relevant to the economy. The economy is constructed on the basis of human inventiveness and human productivity, but nature is just a sidekick, an aid to that system. So if we didn't have insects to pollinate flowering plants, ecosystems around the world will collapse. But pollination isn't a fundamental part of our economic system. The hydrologic cycle that circulates fresh water around the world is not a part of that system. Nature is creating soil by composting dead plants and animals. That's not in the system. Nature is filtering water as it falls. All these things that nature is doing to keep the planet habitable are not in the economic system. And Mark Carney, in his book Values, points out in his first chapter that Jeff Bezos' Amazon is valued by the economy in over $100 billion. Amazon rainforest, the greatest ecosystem on the planet, has no value to the economy until it's logged, dammed, mined, or grows soybeans, cattle, or cities. Now, if that isn't a screwed up system, the economy couldn't exist without the natural world. And we think, oh, AI and all of this stuff, the internet, that's going to keep us from having to live in the real world. Baloney. If you look at just the cost of AI in terms of energy use, it's massive. And we have to go back to understanding what is our life, our society built on. It's built on clean air, clean water, clean soil to grow our food, and clean energy that comes from the sun through photosynthesis. And it's the diversity of living things that creates those fundamental needs, what indigenous people call earth, air, fire, and water. If we don't base the very way we live on these sacred elements that keep us alive, then it just doesn't make sense how you can have a global economy that disregards those fundamental things. And then to top it off, we leave out nature, and then we create something that we think can copy a cancer cell. Cancer cells think they can grow forever. Nothing in a finite world. Mr. Musk, I'm sorry, but the idea that, we can, in outer space, we're going to be able to get all the stuff that we need, we can go on forever. This is madness. Growth is driving us to destroy the systems that keep us
Yeah, and
alive.
David, one of the things that I think often pressures growth is just the mind's short-termism, right?
Yeah,
The short-termism
sure.
mindset, and certainly in boardrooms all around the world, it's just the pressure to grow
Yeah.
just forces people to think short-term results. And so I'm wondering,
Sorry.
what's your advice for decision makers faced with those pressures of getting quick short-term results over trying to solve these bigger pictures issues?
This is why it's not going to be economic. This is where I differ from Mark Carney and Lord Stern, who published the first, Nicholas Stern published the first report saying the cost of doing something about climate change was way less than the cost of not doing something. The economy it will be destroyed as we undermine the very systems that give us the atmosphere of the planet. Now, let me say right now, the planet is not in trouble. We're in trouble, but the planet will do what it did for 4 billion years before life appeared on the planet. The planet is going to go on long after we're gone. It'll just chug along. But the very factors in the biosphere that keep us alive and healthy are under grave danger. So we are the ones that are at threat. And I am sorry, but it's the economic system now that is driving us. It's not just short-termism. And, it's terrible that companies are. I remember reading that Apple was in trouble. Why was it in trouble? Not that profits were plunging, but that their sales hadn't grown in a quarter. So
Mhm.
suddenly uh, Apple's in trouble. I mean, what the hell is going on? The demand for growth and increase in profitability. That's crazy. You can't grow forever in a finite world. That's simple mathematics.
It is. And you say science is a powerful tool to solve problems. And so, and I hear you say the planet is not in trouble. It's we're the ones who are in trouble. So science will ultimately solve the problem for us, I suppose.
No, science is not going to solve the problem. The problem now is, first of all, science, we're creating problems. Science is, we just don't know enough to be able to do it. I know people want, carbon capture and storage and all that stuff they think which allows the fossil fuel industry has been an evil corporation because it's driven by one reason, one thing only, and that is to make money. And they have known since 1959. And then in the 60s and 70s, their own scientists told them that burning fossil fuels and increasing our use of fossil fuels is going to create a problem by the year 2000. They've known that. And but instead of saying, hey, look, folks, we're energy companies, we need to find an energy source that will not destroy the atmosphere. They did what? They adopted the methods of the cigarette into the tobacco industry and began to say, no, this isn't true. These are natural cycles. The scientists don't know what they're talking about. Everything to keep profitability going. Didn't the most profitable sector in society didn't spend a penny to try to find alternate energy sources. Instead, they poured billions of dollars into a which continues to this day, into a campaign of denial. If that isn't a definition of evil, they're putting the fate of humanity against the corporate profit margin. I mean,
which is my point when I say science will ultimately solve the problem because we won't be here.
well, no, then nature will recover. We've had periods of major extinction, 5 others. We're in the 6th major extinction phase. You know, I was born in 1936. Half of the plants and animals that were here when I was born are now extinct in my lifetime, and 1 million more species, according to the UN, are in danger of going extinct right now. So, you know, it's science isn't going to solve the problem. The problem is very clear. The planet is overrun by an alien. It's not an alien from outer space. It's not an alien humanity or aliens people or group of people. It's an alien mindset, a mindset that has elevated itself out of the web of life. For 99% of human existence, we were nomadic hunter-gatherers for 95% of our existence until the agricultural revolution. But for 99% of our existence, we knew that we were one strand in a web of relationships with the air, the water, the soil, all other species. And when you're in a web, you know that if you wiggle around as one strand, it shakes the whole web. So you have a responsibility. Indigenous people tell me this all the time. They say, look, we're all in the same canoe. We've got to paddle together. We've got to do it, live in a good way, is what they say. But now, ever since the Renaissance and the Industrial Revolution, we think that we've escaped nature. We now think we live in a pyramid where we're at the top and everything down below is for us. Because with the Industrial Revolution, we could do things no other biological creature could do. Machines could work 24 hours a day, move massive weights, drill to the crust of the earth. We could live in outer space, for God's sake. We can fly faster than the speed of sound. We can live under the ocean. So there seem to be no limits to what we can do. And we no longer pay attention to the fundamental reality that air, water, soil, and food and photosynthesis are the very source of our lives and our livelihood. And until we address that, all of this, oh, do we need a more new tax here? Do we need an incentive there? Do we need to invest our money in nuclear and all? Baloney. We've got a major crisis now. So let me tell you, you don't have to listen to a word I'm saying. How about Johann Rockström, the head of the Potsdam Institute in Germany, who for years has been saying, look, humans are animals like any other biological creature. And we live in a world that has limits. And those limits are what he calls planetary boundaries. There are limits to the clean water, the carbon in the atmosphere, the carbon nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycle. So he's gone through and defined 9 critical areas that we must stay within the boundaries that are set in those areas. If we go beyond the boundaries of any one of those 9, we should be very worried. Well, I was at the kickoff of the Climate Action Week in the United States in New York when Johan Rockström came with his latest planetary health report. This is nothing controversial about this. This is what the latest science tells us is the state of the planet. We have now passed 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries, and we are about to pass a 7th. What the hell? We should be shitting our pants if we pass 1. We've passed 6, and we're going to pass a 7th. Now, he claims, so we're in what's called the danger zone. And if we don't escape the danger zone, then chaos, we pass tipping points and chaos happens. Now, he claims, I don't believe him for a minute, but he claims that we have 5 years. If we can reverse and change the way we act, we could get out of the danger zone. Well, that's fantastic if we have 5 years. But if you look at the history of what we've done about carbon in the atmosphere causing climate change, it's not a very heartening picture to have 5 years. But that's what he's saying. We are in an emergency. And so I'm calling on our government, for God's sake, look at what you did with COVID. And COVID isn't anything like the threat that climate change has. But when COVID was seen as this threat, you know that Mr. Trudeau has spent over $300 billion on the climate file. Where the hell did all this money come from? Well, it doesn't matter. When you have an emergency, you have to do, and I didn't hear the Conservatives going, we can't afford this. No, don't do this. We have to treat the ecological problems we face as an emergency, the likes of which we've never seen before. And I guarantee you, if we did that, all kinds of unexpected things would happen. This is why I've been supporting Seth Klein, who wrote a book called A Good War. Not that wars are good, but a look at what Canada did during World War II. In 1939, when Britain went to war with Germany, Canada was this rinky-dink country of 11 million people. It's hard to believe. In 1939, 11 million, 1 million Canadians signed up to go to war. It's almost 10% of the population. And then if you look at what governments did, they imposed a ban on profit. They said you can't make outrageous profits exploiting the war. We're in a war now. You can't make extraordinary profit. They put a limit on profit. They then set up 28 crown corporations to do the things that government, that the private sector wasn't do. They hired salarymen, executives from the private sector at $1 a year to come in and run the crown corporations. In 1939, Canada was producing 40 aircraft a year. These are just special aircraft that they were making. By the end of the war, 150,000 people were involved in the aircraft industry. We were the 4th largest aircraft manufacturer in the world. And you know, when you look at the response of what we did when we had an emergency, you had no choice, right? You have to go to war and win it. And that's what we have. We've never had a time when it was more threatening than the crisis we face now. Make the commitment. Then it becomes an issue that is no longer economic. It's no longer political. It's an existential one of survival.
Mm-hmm. It's an all hands on deck,
Yes.
all resources on deck moment for sure. Jake, you're muted.
So that unfortunately brings us to the end of our time today. Uh, but obviously, the war continues, the fight continues, the discussion continues. Where can people find the David Suzuki Foundation and your messaging? Where would you recommend we continue this discussion online for the audience?
Well, what I'm saying now is David Suzuki's thoughts on this. The foundation, I'm no longer on the board. It goes its own way. I mean, davidsuzuki.org is where you can get a lot of information. There are lots of groups out there that are concerned about the same issue. Um, but the thing I'm feeling is the desperation of time. And even now, the fossil fuel industry is saying, oh, well, carbon capture and storage and small nuclear reactors and things that haven't been developed, and using that as an excuse to continue to do what they've done. The fossil fuel industry itself has never accepted that fossil fuels have to be shut down. Call yourselves energy companies and look at the alternatives that are available. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, said if we are digging our own graves. And if you're digging your own grave, the first thing you do is stop digging. In other words, if the crisis is amount of carbon in the atmosphere, stop putting it up. But that's what people have been calling for since 1988. I want to remind people in 1988, a major conference on the atmosphere in Toronto, 40 representatives of 40 countries in the world came. Scientists were there. Brian Mulroney was reelected and he opened the meeting. Gro Harlem Brundtland, the Prime Minister of Norway, gave the keynote speech. Stephen Lewis chaired all of the sessions. 1988, and at the end of the meeting, they said climate change, called it global warming back then, represents a threat to human survival, second only to a global nuclear war. And they called for a 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in 15 years. And if we had done that, we wouldn't even have the crisis we face today. So the call was there, the politicians were there, the scientists were there, and we didn't do it. And you know why? Economics and politics. In order to do that, if the world had done that, in 15 years, Canada would have saved over $100 billion and tens of thousands of lives. The problem was we had to invest $70 billion up front. And only 15 years later would we be able to reap the benefits of that investment. Mr. Mulroney knew that he would take a kicking in the head from the private sector like mad for investing that money, and someone else would be in government 15 years later to take credit for it. So it made no political sense to do the right thing. And that's the problem, your corporate executives, yeah, a lot of them know that there's problems with the environment, but their bottom line is set by the quarterly report. Everything depends on that. Politicians, everything they do has got to pay off at the next election. And nobody's thinking the way Indigenous people do when they say 7 generations. You think back on 7 generations of your ancestors and what you inherited from them. And then you think ahead 7 generations to come before I actually act at the present time. Nothing like that. That's why when I gave a talk at the Senate to senators many years ago now, I said the Senate should be the place that takes a long-term view. I said, you don't have to worry about getting reelected. You're appointed for life. You should be the ones with no vested interest in the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
Look ahead, see where the issues are. And the Senate has done that in the past. There was a Senator Sparrow from the prairies who wrote a very, very important research study on soil and how Canada was using up its soil in the prairies. This is what we need, is that long-term view that is no longer bound by, oh, how much is it going to cost? But
Well,
looking from a scientific standpoint, what's the long term?
Mhm.
Yeah, I really liked the note you had at the top of the episode, which is around people getting out of the industry and using that experience. I think that you are using your personal experience in an amazing way. I hope it doesn't take 7 generations forward. I hope that sometime in that 5-year window that you mentioned earlier, we can have you back and talk about what a victory and how everything's fixed, even if that seems a little unlikely now. But thank you so much for joining us today, David.
Thank you.
And while I'm distributing thanks, thank you as well, Deborah, for your expertise and input. And a big thank you to everyone who joined us live today, to those listening at their desks, in their cars, or at their treadmills. We are, as always, glad you're here.